Okay, this will be my presentation on output gap and Okun's law. So, first we need to talk about potential GDP, which is also sometimes referred to as full employment GDP. So here we have a formula, and we can see that Y, or real GDP, is equal to YP, which is potential GDP, plus Y minus YP, so real minus potential GDP. And then Y minus YP is just the difference between real and potential GDP. So, potential GDP is just the level of real GDP attained when firms and businesses are producing at maximum capacity and workers are fully employed. When the economy is in an expansion or a boom, real GDP and employment are increasing and unemployment is falling, which is good. When the economy is in a recession or a bust, real GDP and unemployment are decreasing and unemployment is rising, which is bad. And then the economy is in equilibrium when real GDP and potential GDP are equal to each other. Now let's talk about the output gap. So the output gap is equal to Y approximate, which is equal to Y minus YP over YP. So we can see that that just means that the output gap is equal to real GDP minus potential GDP, all divided by potential GDP. So economists believe that the output gap is the most accurate way to measure how far away the economy is from its potential GDP. The output gap measures how efficiently the economy is employing its resources, such as labor, natural resources, and human capital. The output gap represents the percentage deviation of actual real GDP from potential GDP. Now, if the output gap is negative, we can see that the economy is producing below its potential. If the output gap is positive, the economy is producing above its potential. And if the output gap is zero, then the economy is producing at its potential. Now, in order to talk about cyclical unemployment, we're going to need to look at natural unemployment and normal unemployment. So the natural rate of unemployment is the normal unemployment rate that occurs when the economy is producing at its potential GDP. Now, the cyclical unemployment rate is the difference between the actual unemployment rate and the natural unemployment rate. And we have some different formulas down here, so we can see that cyclical unemployment is equal to the unemployment rate minus the natural rate of unemployment. And then another way to calculate cyclical unemployment rate is you take the Okun's law coefficient, which is 0.5, and we'll get to that after, and then multiply that by the output gap. Alright. This is Okun's law. It's a relatively big formula, and we can see that it describes the relationship between cyclical unemployment rate and the output gap. Now, here we can see that the Okun's law coefficient h shows us the impact on the cyclical unemployment rate from a 1% change in the output gap. And unless otherwise specified, we can just assume that h, or the Okun's law coefficient, is equal to 0.5. So, going over this equation, we can see that it's the unemployment rate minus the natural rate of unemployment, which is equal to the Okun's law coefficient multiplied by the real GDP minus potential GDP divided by potential GDP, which is all equal to the Okun's law coefficient multiplied by the output gap. Now, what this actually tells us is we can see that if the output gap is positive, then the actual unemployment rate is lower than the natural rate of unemployment. If the output gap is negative, then the actual unemployment rate is higher than the natural rate of unemployment. And this equation makes sense because when the economy is doing really well, unemployment is low. But when the economy is in a recession or it's doing really poorly, we can see that unemployment is high, and that's bad. This is why cyclical unemployment and the output gap move in opposite directions. So here's a question, and as a little hint, you need to use the Okun's law formula. Let's say that in 2019, the real GDP of Zimbabwe was 30.2 million, and the potential GDP of Zimbabwe was 24.8 million. If we use the Okun's law and the coefficient is equal to 0.5, then what is the cyclical unemployment rate of Zimbabwe in 2019? So in order to solve this, we're going to need to pull some of our equations and formulas from the past pages. So in order to figure this out, we are going to need to calculate the output gap. And in order to do that, we're going to need to take the potential GDP and the real GDP. So we see here that if we take the real GDP, 30.2 million, minus 24.8 million, divided by 24.8 million, we will end up getting 0.21774. And then if we multiply that by 100, in order to get a percentage, we will get 21.77%. Which is what the output gap is equal to. But we're not done yet because that gives us the output gap. We still need to find the cyclical unemployment. And in order to calculate that, we either need the natural rate of unemployment and the unemployment rate, but we don't have that. But we do have the output gap. So what we can do is we can use the Okun's law coefficient multiplied by output gap formula. We can insert our 21.77%. We can multiply that by negative 0.5, as we can see in the Okun's law formula, and then that'll end up getting us negative 0.1089%. And we can just see that the cyclical unemployment rate of Zimbabwe in 2019 was negative 0.1089%. And for my citations, I got everything from the Hubbard R. Glenn, Koninsky, J.D. O'Brien, Patrick and Rafferty Macroeconomics Canadian edition. Thank you.